Ours is against itself. No, no, it's a mass. It's not based on it. It's a mountain and divided equally against one pound. And it's also. Why is yeah. Oh, yeah. Yes. Yeah, wants to be able to so we not really much of the time. I'm going to share online. We have. If you, you're just going to share the screen, right? I don't just share my screen. No, I'll just share the same. So let me, you know. Yeah, Well,
It's not easy. It's relative. Once you.
Oh. You cannot. I'll see my email. You got it. All right, it started online. You ready? Hi, everybody. It's good to see everybody. Thanks for being here. Some familiar faces. We're really happy to have you here this evening. My name is Megan Davis, for those I don't know, but I'm the Deputy City Manager. If you haven't been to these programs before, this is the fourth in our series of disaster education and outreach events. And we have got a couple coming up. We don't have dates set yet for them, but we are still working on scheduling the lessons learned for Marshall Fire, which will be an overview of the FLA, the facilitated learning analysis. Should be very interesting. And that we're hoping for April, but we maybe pushed it to May. Then we will have a wildfire risk assessment, sort of the next steps, and that'll be some of the information and data that's being compiled by the consultants we're working with around wildfire risk assessment for the city of Louisville, public lands that are owned by the city. And then we are actually going to add, we're working on another one that we're going to be adding that'll be around watershed protection and water source protection. So that one will likely get scheduled in April or May. So look for that, and we'll send out new updated flyer when that gets, when those get put on the calendar. And then again, if you have other ideas, please send us an email and let us know if there's information that you feel would be helpful, not just for families who lost their home in Marshall Fire or who were impacted, but also for everyone else in the community. So we can as a whole be better prepared for disasters here in the city of Louisville. So this evening, we're going to be focusing on wildfire mitigation specific to home hardening and landscaping. And so this presentation will be really a little bit more focused on kind of some of the technical information about how you as a homeowner can do some work on your home, around your home, to help reduce the risks associated with wildfire. And so we've got some experts here this evening. Robbie Schwartz is a consultant, and he has also done some of the work with Boulder County around the Oscar. If you have looked at the Resilient Rebuild website, that's kind of going to be the basis for a lot of the discussion this evening, the portions of the Resilient Rebuild website that are focused on wildfire mitigation. So he's going to talk about that. And then Frank Kinder is from Northern Water, and he is going to talk about some landscaping templates that they are going to be working on, and just some ideas for how to kind of fire-wise and also reduce water use in your gardens. So we're going to use the same format. We'll have each of the speakers speak. We will take Q&A after Robbie's presentation, because as I mentioned, it is quite technical. And then we'll have some Q&A again at the end. And I have some additional information to share as well. Tonight, we're not going to be talking about the 1A funding, but I will talk about some of the funding sources, grants that I'm aware of and that we are aware of at the city, and just give you a little bit of information about that. So with that, we'll get started. Robbie, you want to do a quick introduction of yourself and your experience? That'd be great. Pull up your slide.
I'm Robbie Schwartz. I'm the New Homes Building Advisor for Boulder County's Marshall Fire. So if you have questions about your rebuild, they most likely will come to me to try and answer. Today, we're going to be talking about Firewise construction. And next. So with regards to the Marshall Fire, as you probably know, the primary issue was the wind and the embers. And the embers, being able to travel so far in the air with the wind. But that also really impacted our housing, because the housing stock was from the 80s and 90s and is not nearly as airtight as a modern house. And the embers actually were sucked into the house. So what happens kind of from a physics perspective, if you have a windward side of the house and the leeward side of the house, and on the leeward side of the house, you get a negative pressure. And that negative pressure is translated into your attics and into actually the house itself, and is actually sucking in air on the leeward house. And with that air were the embers. Next. There. So so really the majority of the houses caught fire from each other and just moved down the line there and then jumped the highway, and you know obviously what happened there. So with the rebuildingbetter.org website, how many people have been to the rebuildingbetter.org website? Okay, not enough. There's a great amount of great information on there. Specifically, they're kind of broken into different chapters. Chapter 2 is about resilient homes. Chapter 6 is about landscaping. There are chapters about energy efficiency, about building your team for rebuilding, about all kinds of things, as well as the Excel incentive and rebates that are available, and the state's rebate for building more energy efficient houses.
Is that website specific for the Marshall Fire?
Yes.
Oh,
yes, okay. Yes. This site isn't specific to the Marshall Fire. This site up here is a Firewise construction website that has a wildfire prepares homes program wrapped into it. And there's another one that is actually called Wildfire Prepared Homes, that is a program, and they have checklists and different things. And so this chapter in particular was built off of information that came from that website and whatnot. So there's just some resources there that you could go to find out more about it. Next. So one of the big things with regards to fire and fire protecting your home is kind of this idea of defensible space around your house. So they've come up with the kind of these different zones from 0 to 5 feet, and then 5 feet to 30 feet, and 30 feet to 100 feet around your houses. And some depending on if you're in Louisville or Superior or in unincorporated Boulder County, one of these zones will be more important to you than others of the zones. These two zones are really the most important for you. That 0 to 5 feet area, really no planting should happen in that zone there. You'll see in most newer communities that it's 5 feet of gravel around that house, and that gravel is always sloped away from the house, because the other thing that really damages houses over time is water. And so you want to basically drain that water down and away from the house. But the gravel there is to ensure that there's no combustibles next to the house itself. And then when you get into the 5 to 30 range, you're creating thinking about landscape with less fuel. So or looking at pavers and patios and plant choices that really aren't generating a lot of fuel or are able to capture a potential lot of fuel. And then as you extend the zone away from the house even further, you're really talking about not having the density of trees and whatnot that are farther away from the house, so that those things don't burn and ultimately create fire exposure to the house itself. And that's why this zone really here is what we think about with our typical wildfires up in the mountains with the pine trees and whatnot, and trying to create that defensible space up there. So the Marple fire is pretty unusual from the sense of a wildfire, but these two zones are really applicable in our situation here. So next. And what we really see is that maintenance is probably the key to all of this. Ensuring that we don't have places where lawn clippings can stay, leaves in our gutters, trees, shrubs, just keeping everything maintained there, especially as we move into the fall season and things start drying and falling off and whatnot. We want to make sure that we're able to maintain this 0 to 5 feet space, and also that space that's just a little bit further out from there. Next. Firewise homes. So we're talking about the form of the house. So the form of the house is we end up talking about kind of what does it look like and how simple the form is versus how complex the form is. The more complex the form is, the easier it is for things to get stuck in those nooks and crannies. I was actually walking in my neighborhood yesterday and took this picture. And you'll see these are all leaves and pine needles and different things that are stuck in that crevice of the roof system there. And that's unfortunately a place where embers can land and ignite. So we're talking again a lot about form or maintenance of that structure. But if you are in the process of redesigning your house, in essence, the more simple the house is, not only is it more resilient to fire, but it's ultimately more energy efficient as well, because you have less surface area there that you have to insulate, and you have less separation between conditioned space and unconditioned space. So you have better insulation and those types of things. So you'll see that a lot of Firewise construction is really right in line with a lot of energy efficiency. And from my perspective, I think energy efficiency is kind of the gateway drug into building science and understanding of how houses work and all the other codes that are out there. So again, from a maintenance perspective, we're talking grass clipping, pine needles, leaves, litters, twigs, all those types of things that are going to dry out over time and potentially be a problem with us. And then having simpler forms so we're not trapping those things, and then maintaining, obviously, maintenance there. So again, energy efficiency and resiliency really are kind of go hand in hand. This is what's happening all across where I live in the northwest part of Denver there. And you'll see these older houses and these modern houses. And really things have changed over time because people's expectations of their houses have changed over time. So that's why the code continues to improve. One example of that, if you think about comfort in this house in 1910, what do our grandparents thought about being comfortable there? Well, the reality was that they were willing to do something in that house. They were willing to augment the comfort of that house. They were willing to put on a sweater in the wintertime. They were willing to maybe having to shovel some coal or put a log on the fire there to maintain comfort. Whereas in our modern day, we want to be comfort. Literally, we want to be able to walk around in our underwear from room to room and floor to floor and be comfortable, right? And if we don't meet that expectation, we often call the warranty department, or unfortunately, we might get into litigation there. So this change in how we're building has really changed the way that we're building our houses as well, which means that we're making them much more energy efficient, we're making them much more airtight, and that all translates into more resilient homes, not just from an energy efficiency perspective, but from a fire-wise perspective as well. So our airtight homes now, we do this test on every new home, which is called a blower door test. We're measuring how airtight the house is. And the tighter the house is, the more control and predictability we have of the air flowing through that house. Because we don't necessarily, I can't change the fact that the wind's going to blow, but I can change the fact how that wind is going to affect the house. I can't change the fact that warm air, as it warms, it rises out of the house and has to be replaced by air coming back in. But if I make that house tighter, I can gain control and predictability of that house. Therefore, I can change the fact if embers are going to come into that house or not. So we are building our houses tighter largely for energy, but it also affects embers and smoke and whatnot. And we do have cases in the Marshall Fire where somebody did a deep energy retrofit and made their house substantially airtight, and their neighbors had severe smoke damage, and they did not have severe smoke damage. So we know that this works here. So energy moves by primarily conduction and convection in and out of our houses there, but we're talking also about moisture, gaining control and predictability about energy and moisture and airflow in our houses. And ultimately, this whole idea of building science is it being integrated into resilient construction, fire-wise construction. And there are actually institutes out there that are building houses in these big warehouses. They're subjecting them to fire, they're subjecting them to wind, they're subjecting them to moisture, and they're learning more and more about it. The reality is that it's all integrated, it's all the same. The same building science holds true for all of these different reasons and helps us move forward there. So when we're talking about building tight, we also are talking about ventilating the house correctly. And ventilation, we're talking about whole house controlled mechanical ventilation. But the other things we're talking about from a tight house is conditioned crawl spaces. So you don't want to have if you're going to have a crawl space in your house, you don't want to have a ventilated crawl space because you basically have a hole to the outside where embers can potentially come in to your house. Conditioned attics, people still like conditioned attics, but if you're really concerned about fire, you would also move away from a ventilated attic and move to a conditioned attic there, which is basically taking all the ventilation out and what we call your building thermal envelope, the insulated part of your house that is separated conditioned space from outside, goes all the way up and around your attic space there. Unvented roof assemblies kind of goes with this, but if you don't have an attic space, you have what's called a raftered ceiling there. You can build those in an unventilated way. And then whole house controlled mechanical ventilation gets from the building tight side to the ventilation side. So we're ventilating our houses, we're building our houses tighter, but what we've learned about building our houses tighter is, yes, we're gaining control and predictability of the airflow, but we need some ventilation in the house for the occupants, but also for background moisture control and other issues there. So it's actually not very efficient to ventilate your house, but the upside balances the equation in the direction where we want to ventilate it, because again, the occupants and background moisture control are more important than the little bit of energy that we're using to do this. So we're ventilating our houses with ventilation systems. There are a variety of different ways that you can do it there, but we're gaining control of predictability of that air, and you can actually shut it off in a severe weather event there. So you're not sucking in, again, bringing in embers or smoke or other things into that house, and you have the ability to filter that air as well. And you can put on as much as a MERV 13 filter. There's this MERV rating of filters goes from 0 to about 16. At MERV 13, you're starting to filter out viruses as well there. So you have better indoor air quality there. And then we have to think about spot ventilation as well. So we're going to go through these things just a little bit more here. So unvented conditioned crawl spaces, again, we're gaining moisture control. Just think of this crawl space as a tiny little basement. So I'm moving the insulation from the floor between the house and the crawl space. I'm moving it to the exterior. I'm putting a great vapor retarder on the dirt floor there. I'm slightly conditioning that space, and I've got circulation of that air. So I've just made my space more energy efficient, more comfortable. I've gotten rid of any vent to the outside and I've made it more resilient as well there. So this is kind of all technical stuff, but that's ultimately what we're doing. Thanks. Sure.
When you say conditioning it, is that what you're describing?
Yes.
Including-
Well, conditioning it is actually meaning that I'm heating that space or cooling that space, just like I would my living room. Maybe not to the quite same temperature there, but instead of having it connected to the outside in a vented crawl space, I'm actually actively conditioning it with my furnace. Yeah. If you have raftered ceiling, for example, this is an idea of what normally happens. What we used to think anyway was that air was really smart and it would follow this black arrow and it would come in here and go out the top there. Next, this is an animated slide. So what we actually have to do is we need to separate these two spaces so that air doesn't go through the insulation. So if I have fiberglass insulation or cellulose insulation in my house, it works the same way as the sweater works. Its job is to trap a pocket of air. That pocket of air is what gives you the resistance of the flow of energy from higher concentrations to lower concentrations, just like this sweater is doing. It doesn't matter if I wear fleece or wool or cotton here, it's trapping a pocket of air, and that's giving me that resistance to the flow of energy. So if I don't separate these two spaces, these air pockets don't maintain their stagnant state in essence, and give me that ability to resist the heat flow, or from inside to outside the house. Instead of doing this, which you can do if in a fire-wise house as well, I'll show you these vents can be changed so that they are actually smaller screened, and there are some new vents out there that will actually, when they heat, they basically close off. And if they get hot and they close off, then you actually have to replace them. But you're in essence making your house hardened to that fire exposure there. Or I'm sorry, I thought someone said, well, it was just me. If you condition your attic space here, so just like take your crawl space and you made it in a small little basement, just flip the house upside down, and that conditioned crawl space becomes your conditioned attic. So I've moved my insulation up to the peak of my attic, and I'm slightly conditioning this space in here, and I've gotten rid of all the ventilation in that attic space. But I have to condition it and move air around it so that moisture and other things don't build up in that space there. But again, it's a means of hardening your shell.
Used to be that like shingles had a warranty that was voided, you didn't ventilate. How's that get handled here? Is that all right?
Yeah.
Sorry, can you
So
repeat the question?
the question was, you used to have shingles and other roofing products where the warranty was voided if you didn't ventilate the attic. And there's still some products out there that's the case, but they're different systems to ventilate from the outside if you have to. But often with asphalt composite shingles, you don't need that direct ventilation.
So we should check the warranty of the shingle to make sure they are not voided by going to condition.
Yeah. Okay. Let's do the next slide. Okay, going in just a little bit of detail into this whole house controlled mechanical ventilation system. This is the ventilation system. Because we're building our houses tight, we need to put a ventilation system into our house. There are three kinds of strategies to do that. You can have a supply ventilation strategy where you're pushing air into the house and in essence blowing that house up like a balloon. You can have a negative or exhaust strategy where you're sucking air out like you're sucking on a straw. Or you can have a balanced ventilation strategy where you're taking air into the house and out of the house simultaneously there. Now there are negatives and positives about all of the three strategies. If you're in unincorporated Boulder County, you are limited to doing this strategy. I don't believe in Louisville or Superior. I think you're given the other choices as well. So your builder and architect will help figure out what's the best strategy for your particular house. that meets the needs of the house, the budget of the house, and all those types of things. But again, the big thing here from a fire-wise perspective is that you want to have control and predictability of this air coming in to the house. If it's coming in and coming out, if it's just coming out, you want to be able to close that off when you want to or need to, either because there's smoke in the air, there's pollutants in the air, or unfortunately, there might be a fire. So you want to make sure that you can close that off so you're not bringing any embers into the house.
So that shutting that off, is that automatic or does it you have to?
There are some systems that are Wi-Fi, I'm sorry, the question, I have to repeat the question. The question was, if you need to shut this off, do you have to actually be at home to do that? And it depends on the system. There are some systems out there that are Wi-Fi enabled now. This kind of Internet of Things is moving into housing as well. So you could shut it off remotely in some cases, or you might have to be there to actually shut the system off. Another question.
I can speak to this. My house is retrofitted with ERVs, condition crawl space and all that. And the last thing I did before I left my house, was pull out my phone, shut off my smart switch, so it wasn't sucking smoke into my house. And then boom, the power went out and my neighborhood was on fire. So if your house is about to burn down too, at least you know the power is probably gonna go out.
Yeah.
But I had a smart switch. The last thing I did was try to prevent the smoke damage in my house.
Great, well, that's smart. So the comment was that this woman had a smart switch on her ERV, which is a balanced ventilation strategy. ERV is for energy recovery ventilator. So there's energy efficiency there, there's moisture management there, but there's also potential ability to shut the system off and not bring in air when you don't want to bring in that air. So next.
I have a question.
Oh.
If the builder is building to 2021 IECC, will this be addressed?
If the builder's building to any of the energy codes from the 2012 on, they are required to build their house to a certain level of tightness and also ventilate it with a whole house controlled mechanical ventilation system, as well as a spot ventilation system, which we'll talk about next year. They do have a choice depending on the jurisdiction of which strategy they want to use to do that. So next slide. So this gets into what's called spot ventilation, and spot ventilation is ventilation that happens in your kitchens, bathrooms, laundries, and some strategies to help you there is to think about the screen size of the exit of that air. So these are all exhaust strategies where you're trying to get moisture that you're generating in your shower or your kitchen or your laundry up and out of the house as soon as it's being created. Because again, moisture is the thing that destroys houses over time there. So, but if I have a smaller mesh size in this outlet and I have flap dampers on the outlet, I have better chance of ensuring that air isn't going to be sucked back in through those outlets, and the air might be carrying an ember or something. I'm going to help keep that ember out of the house there. So those are things that you can think of. Now, fencing is another big issue, and this is that same house you might recognize where the twigs and stuff were stuck in the roof there. You might notice that this is mulch, wood mulch that is right next to the house. So that would be a no-no. And this house has gravel, but they're not maintaining it. So you have all the leaves from the fall falling there. They have a metal fence, but they have a wood fence that's connecting to the house here. So these are some kind of guidelines to think about with regards to fencing. Non-combustible fences, if at all possible, or at least keep the debris away from the fences there, so that there is kind of that same idea as the form of the house, where you're trying to not have grass clippings and leaves and whatnot pile up around the house there. More airflow through the fence is better there. And then vinyl fencing, can work, but it is susceptible to that radiant heat of a fire or extreme weather event.
I'm so glad you're addressing fencing, and my neighbors, our fence faces west on that field. woods that caught on fire and a lot of us watched it catch our fences on fire. So would a more open fence still be better in that situation where the wind was blowing all that fire right at the fence line?
Yeah, I mean, I can't say that. So the question was, well, is an open fencing better protection against wind-driven fire, in essence, there? And I can't tell you that I have personal experience with that, but all the literature is saying yes, because the air and the embers would be moving through the fence and not as easily stuck to the fence there. So it should be a better option, whether it's, you know, I don't think anyone could tell you that for sure it's going to work, though.
Yeah, our HOA requires wooden gates, wooden fences, and we had a neighbor who tried to put up a hurricane gate leading up to his house, and they made him replace it with wood.
Just prior to the fire.
Just prior to fire. Okay, so the comment was with regards to HOA rules. Have they changed their rules for the rebuild?
Not that I know of.
Yeah.
That is the cold free.
This point kind of gets to your question. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Decking is another thing to think about here. So consider potentially fire rated or fire treated materials on the deck, so that if embers do fall on the deck, they potentially might not create a flame. They might melt. I mean, if you use one of these plastic or composite wood decking materials, they have different materials there that might melt, but it might not actually create a flame there. They also talk about enclosing underneath the deck because embers and whatnot and grass clippings and all those other things can get caught underneath the decks as well. And then something I don't have here that was also often talked about is that having this enclosure here at the bottom portion of the deck in a severe wind event or wind-driven fire event can actually push, create a dynamic that pushes that wind and those embers up and over the house if it came from that direction there. So another reason to consider enclosing underneath the deck area there. But again, as you'll see almost on every slide, it talks about maintenance and keeping everything clear there.
I'm just struggling with this. Like, I know it's just half the budget, like, sometimes things don't have these ratings, they don't have fire ratings. Like my windows, my builder says go to open windows right here. And they say we don't have fire ratings for any of our windows, and then I'm stuck, I'm like, should I be getting fiberglass ones, should I be getting metal ones? So the decking, sometimes just keeping track is actually important, I'm like good with that. There's a lot of products that don't have ratings, and it just makes me crazy. I think my house is gonna have at least 20 things in it. I didn't think of, you know, how to ask about, you know, do you have any advice about that?
So the comment was that a lot of building materials don't have fire ratings, and I agree. And unfortunately, I don't really have. We need to continue to ask those questions, and unfortunately as fire events keep happening, and a lot of it's being pushed, unfortunately, by what's happening in California versus here. We're starting to see more and more manufacturers come up with innovative products that help solve that issue.
Like, if anyone has a master list of products that are fire rated, you know, that you know, any of these things are definitely safe, that would be so helpful to have been able to find that.
Yeah, I can, yeah, I can do a little research on that and see if I
I
can
would
come
share
up with
that.
something.
Because you-
Yeah.
What does that look like? Decks stand at the well, fire.
Yeah, this was, this picture came from this Fine Home Building article there. Okay, so what's the next slide? Oh, I'm sorry.
Now, the NFPA is the primary sanctioning body for the United States, so National Fire Protection
So-
Agency. but they have a website,
Yes,
they cover all kinds of stuff.
I'm not sure that they have a list of building materials like she's asking for. Though.
I know
So I have
they
to
do roofs,
research.
they do lots of stuff. And I don't know about
A related question, I've just been wondering, in the past, we think about fire treated materials being not great for playgrounds and those types of things because of the consistency. Do you have any comments or thoughts on how that comes into play as we're looking for these new types of materials?
So the question was, are fire rated assemblies sometimes unsafe for us from a health and safety perspective? And I think there is some reality to that. We had these things called, everybody know what a high joist is? It's a joist that's a floor joist, but it's made with this engineered lumber, which basically means that it's manufactured out of wood chips, and basically, so it's all glued together and whatnot. There was a product manufacturer that did that, but added a fire retardant to it. And they ended up having to go back into all of these houses and replace them after they were built. So there is reality to that, we're coming up with new materials. We're figuring out ways of building more sustainably in one way, in the sense that we're not taking old growth forest and we're using wood chips and whatnot. But we have to put those wood chips together with chemicals and whatnot, and those chemicals often, potentially off gas there. So there is another program that's out there called the Indoor Air Plus program. It's another program from the Environmental Protection Agency. So if you're building your house to the Energy Star program, that is another EPA program. And then the DOE Zero Energy Ready Home program is a program from the Department of Energy. But that program actually requires that you use the Indoor Air Plus program. So if you go to there or reach out to me, I can get you their checklist, and they give you some techniques and ideas about how to look for building materials that off gas less than normal there. Let's go to the next one. So construction materials. So this gets into our questions. So that obviously we're potentially looking for Class A fire-related materials, sidings and claddings, insulation materials that are a little bit less susceptible to fire there. But as you've already mentioned, they're not always easy to find and to get in your construction. So I think, even more so than these types of materials, the real thing is kind of the construction techniques that limit the holes and create the tighter house and whatnot, because it's really, it turns out that more often than not, it's the embers that are creating these fires, especially in wildfire scenarios there. And if your siding is going to catch on fire, or your window is going to burst, the fire is so close to the house that you're probably not going to be able to stop that situation. Even with these fire-rated materials, they're probably something's going to happen to that house. So you're really trying to resolve the issue of the ember flying, across Highway 36 and catching something on fire there. Next.
I have a question. On the windows and the siding and that in the construction design, is it smart to put in fewer windows in order to limit the amount of possibility
Yeah.
for something?
You're my
like
kind of woman.
that?
Yeah, so we're actually going to talk about that right here. Because everybody loves their windows, and we love to face them west, and we love to take into that view. And a couple things. One is that you have the potential of baking yourself in the summertime and just overheating the house. You have the potential of understanding more and more that windows are the weakest element in our house. From an efficiency perspective, my windows, even the Alpine windows that some of you are getting, the R value of that window is somewhere in the 5 to 6 range, maybe in the Alpine window. Typical windows are in the 3 range there, whereas your wall is somewhere in the 20 to 25 range in the R value there. And so when we talk to builders all the time, they say, oh, I'm building this great wall, it's an R25 wall. And you do what you call an area weighted R value calculation. And that wall is at least half that 25, if not less, because of the window to wall ratio, the framing factors, and all the other things going on there. So from a resiliency perspective and from a energy efficiency perspective, limiting the windows is a good thing. And when you're looking at windows and designing your house, you need to think about how do you optimize your views and you optimize the light source that you want, that natural light, but ultimately minimize the openings at the same time. There. So maybe one strategy that's often used is you keep the same number of openings, but you downsize them each at least a unit there. So they come in pretty standard sizes. I think we lost it. Yeah. I'm talking too much. So they come in pretty standard sizes. So you want to you potentially can downsize them, but looking for inoperable windows versus operable windows, because they're more airtight and less air and less embers and all those things. Double pane versus and triple pane windows. If you can afford the triple pane window, you get an extra protective layer there, but you also get more energy efficiency and whatnot. Tempered glass is the primary way that you get your fire rating there, so that the glass doesn't actually crack and explode. And create problems there. You've seen tempered glass like in a windshield of your car or something. It just cracks but stays in place. And then thinking about the type, someone was talking about fiberglass windows versus vinyl windows versus aluminum clad windows. So aluminum clad window is nice again from the ember perspective, but the reality is a fiberglass window and a vinyl window probably are fine from an ember perspective. As that fire gets closer to closer and that radiant heat gets higher and higher, your vinyl window is going to fail faster probably than a fiberglass window, and then aluminum clad window is still probably going to fail. It's going to survive the longest there. But the reality is that when the fire's that close, it's hard to say what's going to happen. Avoiding skylights, again, penetrations through your ceiling roof area is not a good idea from an efficiency perspective, but it also gives additional locations for leaves and twigs and other things to gather and whatnot. And then with regards to doors, generally speaking, a metal insulated door is again the most fire hardened type door, and then probably a fiberglass insulated door. And yeah, again, it's the same kind of issues with regards to embers versus actual radiant heat and fire against that door.
You mentioned the outlet windows, they would put tempered glass on that for very, very economical, like $2 or $4 a square foot.
So the comment was that Alpine Windows puts a tempered glass in that outdoor pane, outward facing pane of glass for a very economical price. So to conclude, again, embers and burning pieces of airborne wood. This is just kind of a descriptor of what an ember is. That's our problem. That's the main issue that we face. You know, we live in Boulder County, high wind area. That's not going to change there. You know, it's always been windy and it's going to continue to be windy here. So there are some simple things you can do with your structure and with how that structure is actually built to better protect the house, and will also give you better efficiency, better comfort, lower utility bills, all those things. But it ultimately comes down to maintenance here. So as you can, try and build as tight as you possibly can and ventilate correctly for your house. And then also as best you can, choose the fire-wise or hardened materials as best you can. And again, from my perspective, I think it, is choosing these materials from an embers perspective versus a radiant heat perspective. So for me, myself, I'm not as worried about the Class A roofing material, for example, because I think that I can maintain the house well enough and ensure that things aren't going to be piling up there in my gutters and whatnot. And the embers should, I don't think that a random ember is going to catch that roof shingle on fire. That's, from my perspective there, versus trying to ensure that my house doesn't burn down when the fire is right next door. That's something I'm not sure that any of us can prepare for and prepare for well. So, any further comments or questions?
If we wanted somebody to come and help retrofit, and take care of the vents under the soffit and the roof and various places, who would we call?
That's a good question. I guess a remodeler, and I'm not sure that there's anybody yet that is specializing in that. There might be in the foothills, and you might be able to bring somebody down from the foothills, but I'm not aware of any. But I am aware that Boulder County, I believe, maybe you can help me, Lisa. Boulder County has a wildfire prepared program where they will come and do an audit on your house and give you suggestions and whatnot from a fire perspective.
So yeah, you've probably all heard of the wildfire partners that's, potentially being expanded under the 1A funding. So they have that program in place and that will be getting expanded.
Yeah, and I believe that would be through Energy Smart or something, so it's open to the whole county, I believe.
Yeah, eventually.
Yeah.
Yes, our house was built in the mid-90s, and as you can imagine, it's landscaped with shrubs, literally all the way around the house, probably 30 of them. I don't think we're up to taking them all out. Are there any in particular, any kind of varieties that should be removed?
I'm gonna save that question. So the question was about shrubs that are in an existing house for Frank, who is our landscaping expert and water expert.
And did you say anything about window wells and basements as far as coverage?
Yeah, so the question was with regards to window wells and basements. Again, it's a difficult area to maintain and keep clear of clippings and whatnot. You're going to have that kind of 5 feet area from the foundation out that's going to be rock and whatnot. And it's definitely makes sense to cover that with a greater or other type of structure. There are a number of different covers that are also robber proof. I don't know how to say it. They're designed so that people can't get in through your basement window well there as well. So there you can kind of get double purpose out of it. But yes, covering them for safety, because you might be walking out there doing maintenance and people accidentally fall in them. So covering them makes a lot of difference.
Just want to know for the folks at home, feel free to raise your hand. You can hit the raise hand button. You have some questions for Robbie tonight.
That's why I said a really obvious thing for anyone building a house that I didn't think of, but I almost added was like a trash enclosure open right next to my house. I'm like, where's my trash go? Oh no. It was gonna go right next to the house, now it has to go. I don't know, I'll just take it in the middle of my front yard.
Yeah. So you're saying the question or the comment was having a dedicated space for your trash cans and trash.
That's gonna make like
Recycle.
a fence enclosure, put my trash fence in, but I assume that's flammable. And it can't be right.
Yeah. Yeah. So the other comment was that enclosure might be wooden and might be similar to fencing
No,
material.
like recycling is gonna be in there, that's flammable and it's next to the house.
That's true.
Yeah.
But it would be in yeah, I know. Secure, if you can secure the top, maybe, yeah. Well, secure the trash bin top.
You could get a plastic trash bin, that would not be.
Well, from embers, I believe it would be
Yeah.
enough. From the radiant heat, no. It's gonna melt. Yes.
Yes, we'll make the recording available on the city's website after the meeting, so tomorrow, later tomorrow, and that'll include, you know, the slides as well.
And the slides.
Yep.
Yeah.
Also on the trash enclosure, my daughter is in Southern California, where wildfires are a huge problem. They have a trash enclosure, but they have a sidewalk from the side of their garage to the trash enclosure that's on the property line instead of being right up against the garage. So there's a barrier between the garage and the trash. That's kind of.
So the comment was that someone in California put a trash enclosure, but separated it from the house with a sidewalk.
Yeah, they do that in Boulder, over there is also.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think we had a question in the back.
One of my frustrations, and I know it's already been mentioned as well, is that some of the HOA covenants in the area prevent some of these kind of common sense and I think increasingly desirable solutions. For example, in my neighborhood, you have to bring all the trash containers, recycling, use compost inside. You're not allowed to have some other type of structure. So on one hand, it's a good thing because it's contained. You don't have to worry about how to create that structure. But some folks are, you know, thinking about how to maintain a space in a different way. So it seems to me that increased, and I know some of this is happening, increased conversation with HOAs is key for them.
So the comment was about HOAs and some of the covenant restrictions that don't make sense with regards to firewise construction. And my only comment, I guess, would be anecdotal, that HOAs it has been shown that HOAs are not allowed to prevent someone from putting solar panels on their house, for example. So I would think that it might have to go to court or something, but there should be a reasonable argument to say that you could do some of these firewise construction techniques and not get left at the HOA.
These legislation allowing certain things. Yeah. That would be a good thing.
I thought exactly this argument. If we can make that allowance for solar panels and energy efficiency means, then maybe this is the next step.
Yeah, there is a statewide fire prepared program that's starting. I'm not sure where it's at yet, but I think there will be some starting in there.
Put that debris that gets caught under solar panels.
So the solar panels installer generally puts a screen between the panel and the roof to help keep birds and debris and whatnot out from underneath the panel itself there. Okay, so why don't we move on to Frank, and then we can take more questions after Frank's presentation.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm Frank Kinder from Northern Water. Glad to be here with you tonight, and I'm excited to share with you some ideas that we think might be helpful for your process of rebuilding. I work for an entity called Northern Water. I also have a colleague of mine here on our team who is helping with this endeavor that I'll describe here shortly. So if you decide to work with us in the future, you might come across her as well. Northern Water is located in Bertha, just up the road. And I'll just give you a quick understanding of who we are and why we would be interested in helping you out in your rebuilding. Let's go to the next slide. So Northern Water is a conservancy district that serves water to Louisville, Superior, and virtually all the cities from Boulder and Broomfield up to Wellington and Fort Collins out to the state line. So we're pretty broad, and we are supported in two ways: by a tax revenue and by a small fee on the units of water we deliver to cities and farms and municipal and industrial users. So we collect that water up in Rocky Mountain National Park. If you've been around Lake Granby or Grand Lake or Shadow Mountain Reservoir, those are all bodies of water we manage on behalf of the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. And this project started in the 1930s after the Dust Bowl, when the majority of this area was in farming production to provide supplemental water to all the cities that were growing at the time. And so that project resulted in what's known as the Colorado Big Thompson Project, which moves that water from the western slope over to the eastern slope. And in doing so, we serve a whole variety of entities here. Let's go to the next slope. The water comes through a tunnel and then it is stored in terminal areas, including Boulder Reservoir, Horsetooth Reservoir, Carter Lake, and more. On the way, it also produces quite a bit of electricity through hydropower production, which is how it's repaid for the project over the years. So currently we are serving 1.5 million acres and 614,000 acres of irrigated farmland. But a lot of the water is moving to the cities from the farms because of the urban growth that we're experiencing. And at the same time, the water we're collecting is under threat from climate change, and we've seen 20+ years of reduced water availability. And so what we would like to do is be able to serve the cities, especially Superior and all the cities here in Boulder, as well as those up north and out east as well, and keep agriculture in production and sustain the environment. And one of the ways we're working to do that is by helping to use less water in the landscape and keep it to something that we want it to be resilient and very attractive and good looking and adding property value. Let's go to the next slide. So we use Colorado River water, and that water is generally going down into Lake Powell and Lake Mead, which you may have heard are at their lowest levels since they were filled from their original construction. And we are being asked to contribute water to those reservoirs by using less in the eastern slope. And so what we're trying to do is work with all the cities we serve in the new construction and in rebuilding or modifications to existing landscapes. And we're doing that through helping cities like Louisville with Lisa to integrate water efficiency into land use planning. And when this fire occurred, we saw an opportunity. And so we think about the Colorado Water Plan is a charge to all of us who live here to use water more wisely in the landscape, create a new water ethic, and to use less turf, because turf is the majority water user. And it is something that we're quite familiar with. It's been the predominant solution in landscapes for generations, but it comes with a sticky side effect of using a ton of water to make it green. And so we're working on a new design paradigm, which is going to look a little different, perhaps like these two down here to your right. Next slide. So the reason we're here today is after some of the folks in your position saw that after the fire presentation last summer, they learned about the Sonoma Marin Water Saving Partnership out in California. Very similar organization to ours, which supported Santa Rosa after the Camp Fire, which burned over 4,000 homes, and really in majority 2 neighborhoods. And so they said, the Sonoma Marin Water Saving Partnership, as a result of that fire, which is here, put forth some usable landscape plans for the city to approve fast-track rebuilding and permitting of the designs that they created. One, because so many people were underinsured and didn't want to be designing landscapes on top of everything else all of you are already doing. And 2, it's an extra cost that they didn't want to take on if they didn't have to. 3, why not make these landscapes beautiful, functional, and providing ecosystem services and benefits? And so when they reached out to us, we sought to learn more. We spoke with our friends out in California, and we decided to take this on as an initiative for 2023. And so we've been working to understand what it looks like, and events like tonight help us understand that. Next slide, please. Now, I know there's too many words here, even for me. So I want to tell you what we're trying to achieve. The goals of this are to support you folks, but also the folks who are going to be in the next natural disaster too. So we would like to make these long-term viable landscape designs. We also want to help people have designs that are water efficient, climate resilient, and fire resistant too. If we can check all those boxes, I think we'll be successful. But even more so, if you like looking outside and going outside and seeing where your recreation can occur, and it saves you some money in the process. We'd like to be able to say that we can minimize landscape construction costs through doing this within the economy of scale. Some of the measures that Robbie just showed you are best practices. If we can achieve those same things, we can help you save a lot of money in doing so. We'd like to be able to support the pollinators and habitat provision and all the things that landscapes can do while providing beauty and functionality, maybe even some edible landscapes for ourselves as well. And then you heard a couple of questions tonight about HOAs. I live in an HOA too. I'm silly enough to be on my HOA board and in our freshman review committee. So I feel like I hit myself with a hammer when I get all these requests. Do we have any HOA board members here? Wow, yeah, another glutton for punishment. You what?
Because I'm on my system's pretty good.
That's good. Well, if anything, it gives you a real feeling for what it's like. And so the HOAs in the community in the state are not able to resist your request to change from a turf dependent or turf dominant landscape to an alternative. What they can do is they can dictate what those designs look like. And so right now there's a bill in the legislature that's trying to help the HOAs to facilitate that transition for their residents by giving some guidance on those residents to have some landscape plans. All that to say, we're hoping that the plans we make would also be used by the other neighborhoods that have HOAs. So people could say, pick one of these 6 plans. And if you would like these, then they'll be an acceptable format for transitioning to a lower water landscape. So it provides some surety to the HOA and to the residents. We're hoping that will occur. And then the other group of people we're seeking to serve here are the new home construction builders and developers. They would like to be able to offer these home design landscapes from the start. But sometimes they don't feel comfortable doing so, and there's a couple of trade-offs that come with that. So we're offering them a way to do this with more common practice. We'd also like to include options for green infrastructure such as rain gardens and rain barrels. And the idea would be these would be a checkbox that you could include and plug into that landscape if possible. So not as a necessary component, but an option. Like buying a car a little bit, right? You pick your choices on options. And then we'd like to provide a maintenance manual, which is what the folks in Sonoma Marin did, to do the landscape maintenance successfully. So you have a long-term successful layout that looks good and you like being there. And then in a perfect world, wouldn't it be nice to be able to say that a lot of these landscape designs were successfully adopted? In California, over 66% of the homes reconstructed chose these landscape designs. That's a pretty good number. So if we were anywhere close to that, we'd feel pretty successful. And then I think this would also help us define a new landscape ethic. If we can meet that goal of the state, and honestly, our organization too, and we live in a place that meets some of our natural limitations, I think we might be able to say we're making sense where we live. Let's go to the next slide. I'm sorry to tell you that this next one has just as many words, and it's just the plan. So we're drafting the statement of work, and then we're selecting our contracting team. The folks out in California had to deliver these plans, and I'm going to go through some of the details of the plans with you so you can see exactly what they would include. But then we would be able to find someone willing to put these out and with the expertise to do it really well. And then we would try to have a couple of meetings, one perhaps with you to find out if the design proposals that they offer would be acceptable, if it's something you'd want to choose and put into your land, and another meeting for the landscapers and the builders in the region to see if they could deliver them. We feel like that's an appropriate set of stakeholders or constituents to do this well. And the same thing for incorporating the green infrastructure. We would be looking to comply with all city laws, county laws, state laws, anything that has a compliance checklist. We would want that to be included in this solution. So we're not looking to get anybody in trouble, ourselves included. And then we want to publish these plans likely on our website if we have time. Lisa's going to show you what the Sonoma Marine Water Saving Site looks like, so we can demonstrate what we would seek to emulate. And then we would want to measure that too. We'd want to measure the success. Maybe perhaps we could visit your site and see if it's working for you. And if there's areas that are not performing well, we could make some changes. So that's the idea behind doing this over the long run. Next slide, please. Less words, more fun. Okay. So if you didn't see after the fire and you're unfamiliar, these are some of the metrics I went through. Oh, I gave you the wrong number. I said 66%. It's 44%. So I guess 66% of the people didn't use the templates, but that number isn't as compelling. So they're still up right now. They're still being used. And this is an example of one of the templates. And the homes there, of course, oftentimes use different types of roofing materials. But you can see here they have complete coverage, which is one of Lisa's constraints. You have to have a high degree of coverage over the land, right? So you can't have open soil that creates a stormwater issue. So we have to think through those elements too. If there's a slope, you can see here, they've got some retaining walls to allow for that slope to be addressed. And then some trees for some privacy and some beauty and all the other energy conserving benefits that trees provide as well. And they're very clever in the way they design these templates. They allow them to be driveway left, driveway right. cul-de-sac, corner lot, and I'll go through some of those elements. So we think they set a pretty high bar. Next slide. When they released the templates and people started adopting them, they got the call for the request manual. That was a phase 2, which was published a bit after these. And so we would seek to do the same thing. It could be a phase 2 for us as well. I'm aware that many of you are already in your rebuilding process. I think I heard you mentioning you're going to bring your permit. Is that you who's bringing it to her? So I wanted to bring these to you sooner, but we've had some delays just due to the nature of our business. So I don't have a deadline on when I would be able to get these out, but I'm hoping by this year, and I'll give you some details on what that could look like. Let's go to the next slide. So some good news is that slides are continuing to be used and they're receiving awards. So I feel like they're kind of a successful competitor in this regard. They're well designed. So the Irrigation Association is a national entity that provides irrigation expertise. They thought that this was so good that it won an award this year, and these were put forth in 2019, I believe. So they're pretty durable. And they also got a different award for, well, similar award, but for making sure people knew how to participate. And so that's where we partner with Lisa and with Megan and others to seek to get the word out as we develop these. Next slide. So here's an example of what these will go through. And I have a few slides here on the components of the plan. So the concept plan is an overview, if you will, or a bird's eye look down on what the plan looks like with identification on the features and then some example plant material. And there's associated pages with these. You can see here that this is an eco-edible one. So they're seeking to have some edible components. Isn't it nice if you're going to put water in the landscape that you can maybe eat some food out of it too? I sure would think so. And then they show you examples of what the plants can look like there too. Of course, Sonoma is a wonderful place. It's Mediterranean climate, so anything grows. But we're pretty lucky here too. We can have a successful plant palette. It's just a little different than theirs. And at the bottom, you see this was a coalition, a project team, if you will, of different folks, a civil and a landscape architect, a couple other folks to make this happen. We would expect likely the same type of approach. Next slide. So these are the renderings, and on the website, you can go through a progression. So they show you what a new planting looks like, and then as those plants mature. Typically, it's a little less expensive to buy smaller plants, right? You can buy a 4-inch pot instead of a 1-gallon pot, or a 3 or 5 gallon, and you know what those plants look like. So a landscape design will include what the plants will look like at maturity, and they kind of fill in the space. So there's a setting of expectations necessary for these types of landscapes. Because they're not turf, you don't get that immediate blanket effect of rolling out a carpet of lawn. And lawn has its benefits and its trade-offs, of course. It is easy and it is relatively cheap to install, and we're very familiar with it. A planting plan like this has very full coverage, but you see it has a lot of features that I think are pretty attractive. You've got the bench, you've got perhaps some food areas here, you've got a lot of color and year-round interest. And here at the street strip, which are awfully difficult to irrigate efficiently, you've got some nice planting material here. And all of these would meet the typical expectations of most homeowners, I would think. And so we're hoping that these kind of features can be included, 1 or 2 architectural renderings. That's the same one we just saw, but you'll know that the driveway's on the right here, without trees. And then there's one where you can plug in and the trees are in the front, like that previous picture. Next slide. So this is a permit cover sheet. It's a little bit more restricted out there. They have other rules that the folks have to follow. I would not expect that Lisa would have a permit list quite like this.
We don't actually have any permits for landscaping, with the exception of a little bit for your irrigation system. Some of your HOAs might want to review these, things like that. So, and other jurisdictions, you know, that Frank is planning this for might have permits. But for Louisville and Superior, you don't have to do this.
But can you also mention the fencing from the house to, was it 5 or 6 feet from the house?
So yeah, just a quick note for in Louisville anyway, we've exempted if an HOA or your PUD, sorry, I'm gonna rephrase that. If your PUD requires a wood fence for that portion of the fence that connects to your home, you do not have to install a wood fence there. we, as a local government, can't compel the HOA to change their rules. So it's state legislation and other legislation like that. So that's, you do need, and you also need a permit.
And that's what's been difficult, is originally we thought we would just make these for Louisville, Superior and unincorporated Boulder County. And if that was the case, then we would be pretty sure about what to include here. As we seek to make these more available across other areas, this gets more complicated. So we're trying to figure out how to do that to where it could be effective and appropriate for different areas if it was down in Durango or Denver. So we're gonna lean on the consultants for the expertise in that regard. Next slide. Oh, there we go. So this is a layout plan of where things are planted. Those little circles there refer to the plants and each by type. And so these are always hard to read, even if you do this all the time. It's a print of, I think it's a font of 2. So, you know, it's a little difficult. But this gives the direction to the landscapers on 1, how to bid the project, and 2, what to do with the materials when they get there. And it should also help with the site grading and all the preparation to do this. And Robbie, if I get something wrong, let me know too. So this is the idea that you would have a plan that is ready to go, so that if you were choosing the eco-edible option, you would be fully equipped to receive a bid from someone, or to just give it to your builder and say, go make it beautiful, and they would be able to do that. So this is what they delivered, and I think they did a pretty good job. It's my experience that this would be a nice place to stay. Any questions about a landscape plan? Have some of you seen these before, or is this familiar information?
Are you in California? If they created the template, how much specificity on the plantings, on the types of plants in particular?
Pretty specific. So most of these come with what they call a plant palette. It's going to have the type of plant, the size, and the number. And then it also will include the water use metrics as well as the maintenance. Well, the maintenance manual would really refer to what's included in these. And many of the maintenance steps are relatively consistent among these, but not always. So here, let's see if this shows. Shrubs. I can't really read what that says, but there's a number of those in a certain gallon size. Looks like plant quantity is 9. And so we would be able to see what the shrubs are, 3 to 6 inch full sun, the rain garden here. So there's likely a downspout right here, DS, this thing going in. The rain garden would have a depression where the certain types of plants function well when they're either wet feed or not. And so it probably has it's moved from the house, as Robbie said, and then it would probably go into a depression. Actually, it's probably here. Truthfully, there it is. Downspout goes underneath this walkway and then is out in this area. And so this would be probably a really neat feature. And it would keep that water on site, and what they would say is effectively use it for reducing the irrigation demand in this landscape. And if they were clever, they might do that in multiple spaces. So, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, we had a neighbor who took out all her side and put in a xeriscape front yard. And in the summer, it's gorgeous, and the winter, it's completely dead and it's rock.
So there's different types of plants that can be defining a xeriscape. If it's a perennial, some of those perennials are woody plants that have materials that provide winter interest. Some of the native grasses or the ornamental grasses can be left up. In fact, it's a good idea to use them, to leave them up, because a lot of plants, some of the native bees actually, they live in those little tubes over the years, over the winter time, and then you can shear those down in the springtime. So I would agree, the xeriscape that's all rock is not my preference, and not Northern Water's preference either. But the true landscape should really have, a true xeriscape should have beauty all year long, sir.
What's the latest and greatest on the laws regarding capturing rainwater? Because yeah, well, what rain, right? I mean, just a few years ago, they allowed a 55-gallon drum of rainwater.
That's correct.
But what's the latest and greatest?
2 of them. So each resident can have 2 55-gallon barrels, rain barrels.
Okay, well, that's like one hot water heater level. right?
Yes, yes.
We have a question online. Larry, if you want to unmute yourself, you can ask your question for the group.
Thank you. Just for the landscaping that you illustrated, it appears that you have plants within the 5 foot of the house. And I don't know if that's, I'm online, so I may not be getting an accurate picture, but I would suggest you coordinate with the building people to make sure your landscape plans allow for that 5-foot gap of planting materials.
That is an excellent observation, and I would agree. I don't believe we would seek to have any of the materials within those layers that Robbie described. So they would have that barrier with the rock. And that could be a walkway or something else that would substitute perhaps for the walkway. I think it could be integrated, so it would be a feature of the landscape. But you're right, you wouldn't want those to be as close. It's possible that these are stucco homes or some other external material. And perhaps there's a way to allow that to be planted closer if there's a different building material. Probably, is that true? No, I'm not aware. Okay, well, that's a good observation. And we would seek to have fire resistant elements to any of these plants, all of these plants too, I should say. So the fire resistant plants, fire resistant material, and ideally defensive zones, defensible space.
I have one other comment on this. In the plant choices, there are a lot of people who would prefer that they be native plants. And also we were just became a bee city. So if there were pollinator gardens, that would also be
Yes,
a real attraction for a lot.
yes, we would like to see those same benefits accrue to these designs as well. Absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
What do you see as the primary conflicts, if any, between kind of water-wise landscaping and our fire mitigation process that we're taking now? And how do you philosophize about that?
Well, I don't sleep well to begin with, so this makes it even harder. I would say that there's definitely a duality there between how much water can you put down. I learned today, this was a surprise. On my team, we have 2 horticulturalists, and one said that cactus are actually fire resistant because they hold water in their leaves. And you wouldn't think so, but I believe what she says. And so I think there are some plants that can provide the beauty, like you said, the year-round interest, but also be less likely to become 1-hour fuels or ladder fuels. So I think you've got the options to do so. Certainly, well-watered turf grass would be an assistant in, fire resistance. That's true. But it comes with that trade-off that water is going to get more expensive and water restrictions are likely to be permanent instead of temporary. And so if we can make the same benefits through less water requiring plants, that would be my ideal. Is that getting close to your question? I just don't think we're to a perfect place yet.
We do hope to have, I think, a mix of professionals on the team that developed the proposed planting list, though, that can understand both impacts to water as well as potentially experts from CSU or other, kind of locally regional organizations who can really inform the fire-wise perspective of this.
And I personally love this because I am one of those people who's been all for the pollinators. Let's not mow everything to a nub, in the fall. But then I'm really trying to be conscious of where I'm taking my property now that we had the fire line. But the fire line's in my backyard. That stopped in a yard that we had, we organic, we try to use less water, but it was turf. So as I think about pulling and replacing, I struggle with these dualities.
Right, and I'd like to believe that they included the same intentions with their layouts too. I can't speak to the close nature of those plants next to the foundation plantings per se. But it would seem that they wanted to provide that defensible space here as well, and we would seek to do the same. I'm still learning about fireproof and fire resistant plants. I know that there's low water plants, that's kind of our specialty, and if they can also check that second list, that would be perfect. One of the things here you'll also see is permeable pavers, and so that's a nice way you can move that water into the ground. Permeable pavers do require a different type of engineering because of the need to let the water go down and eventually move away, but they can be an effective stormwater mitigation strategy too. So if you have a small lot, they also can provide longer term durability. They don't require, especially compared to say asphalt, they don't require the regular resurfacing. They tend to be a very long life material. So permeable pavers are included under a future slide here. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, am I correct? Junipers are beautiful, they're native, they're water wise, and they go up like Roman candles. Is that correct?
I would say just as much as cedar fences. Yes, they're pretty high. They're pretty well igniting items. Yes, what's that?
The resinous nature.
I'm not sure the physics, but I certainly understand that there's a Junk Your Junipers effort under Boulder County to remove those. Yeah. And they do provide a little bit of habitat benefits for animals, but not as much. They are low water, so that's one of those trade-offs, right? But there are other alternative low water plants that don't burn as much. Go ahead.
Are there any design ideas for if you have a yard that you want to be able to accommodate a dog for?
Oh, yes. So one of the things that the advisory committee requested is some backyard designs. And there is a really neat grass that's come out. It's called dog tuff. Dog tuff is a sterile version of a Bermuda grass. And it was developed from a different part of the world, but it works really well here. And it, for one, uses very little water. It creates a very complete mat. So if a dog pees or scrapes into the grass, it will repair itself through what they call stolons. And then it looks great. It greens up a tad later than Kentucky bluegrass, but it doesn't grow that high. So you can mow it every few weeks if you want to. And it kind of creates this little wave effect. And dog tuff grass will be very low water, is drought tolerant, is climate resilient. I mean, it likes it as hot as it can be. And then it also uses less water and it's soft to lay on. So if you'd like to see some, we have it on display up at our conservation gardens in Berthoud at Northern Water headquarters. And it is slightly invasive, so that if you were looking to put it into a place that was next to a native area, like a body of water, some cities have a restriction on that. Fort Collins, for example, does. But if you had it in a contained area, it's very successful. Its only restriction is it doesn't grow well in shade. It likes full sun.
Is there an issue with like fake grass?
So fake grass is a challenge because it looks nice, but it gets very, very hot and dogs can burn their feet on it. So it does require either someone to wet it down, and then it does have a long-term viability challenge with not being recyclable. And it has to be still cleaned too. Most of it has little tiny holes and it will percolate the water, but it does require you, I guess you could vacuum it.
No.
Yes, ma'am.
From Colorado, they think like you want a small patch of grass to plant clover. And is that something here?
So I think the challenge with clover is it needs a lot of nitrogen to be successful, and we don't tend to have a lot of nitrogen in our soil naturally here. And so it works really well in other parts of the country where you have that loam, but most of our soil is either clay or sand or sandy, a mix of those two. So you can buy some of those online and it can work. It just has to have particular areas. It can work in the shade, and if you have really well amended soil, some of the soil in the Boulder Valley is really good quality. So it might be site specific. Yes, ma'am.
Is Northern Water advising any figures for marshal fire?
To my knowledge, no, we have not been involved in that. I think you're lucky to have Robbie and folks like him who've been doing this, but we have not been involved. The only advisory request we've had is to look at those Boulder County ditches that run through the communities, and none of the ditches that were along the areas that burned are owned by Boulder, owned by Northern Water. They're not managed by us, but it's smart for us to take care of the ditches we have, so they're not a line of travel. So I hope that was answering your question.
So then, for people like us who are building homes from scratch.
Yeah.
Are our builders incorporating all these ideas?
So it's up to you, and your contract with your builder to understand if any landscaping is included with that. We're not requiring, as we mentioned, in the city, we don't have a permit requirement for landscaping. We actually don't have any minimal landscape requirements at all, other than you keep your weeds down 8 inches. So, but because of that, and because we recognize the under insurance, like as Frank was mentioning, we really wanted to partner And we are beyond appreciative of the work that they're doing. I just want to make that clear that they've stepped up and are volunteering and are going to be funding a lot of the development on this for, for you all and on your behalf. To develop these landscape templates, because we do see this as a gap. This has been identified as a gap that you all might be facing in your rebuild process, that your builders, probably are not going to be doing this for you. So, big thanks, to Northern Water and Frank for coming out tonight to share and announce, kind of this program.
Well, that's kind of you, Lisa. We don't really have a way to interact with the in-water users. What we do is provide that raw water to the cities that they then treat and deliver to the residents and the schools and businesses. How about we go to the next slide? So this is an irrigation plan, and this would simply show what type of irrigation components are underneath so that they would be all set beforehand. So you know where your drip would be, your valves, your isolation valves, your valve boxes. Netafim is actually an underground drip that has an emitter every 12 inches. So the idea is that you would have the details to plan this, and it would be bid and then installed and then checked, so there's no leaks. And so it wouldn't have any performance issues. Pressure regulation is a very common component to these now. So you don't have the high and low pressure areas. And so those are really good water conservation measures that we would seek to require in these so that that would be smart from the start.
You definitely have to still water our yard. Don't question it. You definitely are going to have.
One of the beautiful parts about native grasses is that after establishment, it's possible for them to exist without water on their own. If we get enough precipitation on a relatively regular basis, they can do pretty well. They might not look as uniform as if they got a little more regular water, but they can have the appearance of almost like a lawn. The color's a little different, the texture's a little different. So some of these can be tweaked over time if we get relatively regular precipitation. So you can see the walkways here, then probably some Netafim. So this would be part of the plan. Next slide, please. And then if it makes sense, rain gardens and swale options could be included. And then this is the design behind those. So the depression with an overflow and a drain. Here, if you had the clay soils, they would be very slow draining because they have a very tight pore space. So sometimes these may not be necessary. We're not certain that this is something of high interest. So if we had an outreach meeting with folks in your position, they might say, yes, we would like to have these included, or no, that's not really important to us. Believe it or not, rain gardens can actually be quite beautiful because you add a couple of swales and you have some more height in your landscape. And so it can add another dimension that many people aren't familiar with. And they're very easy to take care of. They just require a little bit of periodic clean out. Let's go to the next slide. How are we doing on time?
We're doing good.
Okay.
Good.
And then the idea behind the rain barrel and rainwater harvesting can occur too. As you said, you can have those two. Usually the downspout has a direct input into the barrel, and then it's got an overflow device. So if you get a really big event, it'll have a little flapper that will activate, and then it'll overflow out into the regular gutter. There are some constraints around how long you're supposed to wait to use that water. Technically, within 72 hours, you're supposed to release the water from the rain barrel so that you're utilizing it in your landscape. Some of these larger cistern concepts here are a different story, and I don't think we would go to the effort to include those. I don't think it's commonly used here, not in the residential space anyway. Next slide. And so what we would look to do is demonstrate how much water these landscapes would use, and then how much it would cost to own them by comparing them to the water rates that your utilities charge you. And we would compare those to our control, which would be a turf dominant, 80%, 20% shrubs landscape. And so we could say something like that may take you $1,000 a year to irrigate. And perhaps these would be 50 to 75% less. And so you could expect to spend that much less on your water. And then you could also equate some of the maintenance. I'm getting tired of mowing lawn as I get older. And so, I mean, my dad did it right. It's not this thing we have built in, but sometimes I think I have other stuff to do with my time. Maybe you feel the same way. So part of me is interested in a lower labor landscape. Maybe that's how we should call it. Instead of lower water, lower labor. It's more appealing. But we want to give people an idea of what you can save both in water and costs on doing this. Next slide. So one of the biggest features of the Sonoma's product is a cost estimate. And I want to be clear, I'm sorry, I messed that up. It's a cost opinion. It's not a cost estimate. And it's hard to get your mind around because one of the challenges is no lot is really the same size, right? And so as you get a bigger lot, the costs will change depending upon what features you want. And that was a little complex for me to understand. And of course, these prices now are out of date because this was pre-pandemic. And so, and also pre-inflation. So we really have no way to really know how accurate they would be. We would like to be able to include this element. I would expect it was quite complicated to create in a way that seems it would be accurate. But you can get some ideas here. Grass plugs are what's required for that dog tough turf. So you can't get it in sod. You have to put in these little plugs and you put them in a matrix and then they quickly grow in, generally within a season. But that's a different format than sod. So, you can get an estimate for what those are and they're made up here at Bath. If you've been to Bath Nursery, they grow the dog tough plugs and you can look at the different options here. So the idea is if you can pick and choose which models you want, you can get an idea of what it should cost. And some of these are relatively static. Trees might go up, but there's been a huge demand for trees recently. So 2-inch caliber trees, as many of you know, are not easily available anymore and the price has shot up. So this is something we would like to include, but we're not absolutely certain that we can. Next slide. And that was for materials. What's that?
$79 or $69 for 70 plugs. Right now.
Are you on dogtoughgrass.com?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's actually pretty affordable. They used to be harder to get. And so this is the contractor side of what it might cost from a contractor's perspective. I really don't know what kind of cost increases occur in the contractor space. And I imagine that's difficult to navigate sometimes. There's spreadsheets that these folks deliver to do this work. So in those spreadsheets, you can plug and play which options you want and get those cost opinions to help you budget for these investments. We would like to be able to do something like that too. Next slide. And the optional items too. So if you added in different things, they give you, it's just like buying a car. This is, I think, the extra stereo piece or something like that. So next slide. So they made a printable package so that you could print this out and in theory, give it to your builder, take it to Lisa and have it retained for your records. And I think this was a feature that they added in. It's a very nice option. I don't know if this is a common approach in the building circle, Robbie, but I think this was a nice element that they did. So let's go to the next slide. So I want to reemphasize that the fire protection is an element we would want to include in these. We would want to address what Robbie shared with you on some of the elements around fencing and decks and next to the foundation. There were questions about shade structures. What can we do instead of trees? Well, maybe there's a shade sail option. The permitting, Lisa's clarified that for us. What kind of slope requirements? I think that the landscape templates in Sonoma have a maximum of 8%. And they said, if you're going to have something that's more severe, then you'll have to do a different design because of the implications for what that needs. So there are some limitations to these designs that they certainly won't address. And then we would like them to be appropriate for the neighborhoods like yours. So I'll show you what some of those look like in the next. Oh, but before we go there, so we would like to have some of these features, a budget and minimal cost one for those. If it's not something they can spend a lot of money on, a basic approach would be very nice. One for slopes that has at least some retaining walls and boulder. I think the advisory committee asked for a design or two with a backyard. That's not part of the ones in Sonoma. So we would have to see if that's something we could include. Of course, backyards are custom personal spaces, so it might not be ideal to have a backyard that is adoptable. But from what Robbie showed earlier, some of those are pretty attractive. So perhaps we could have one or two. Certainly designs with no turf in front are going to be included. There were questions about a privacy approach. So some plants that grow higher and give you a little bit of a screen would be perhaps attractive to some people. And then the pollinators, of course, we're big believers in the pollinator importance as well. Thoughts or questions about this?
Just a question. What do you recommend for mulching? What I use now is the shredded stuff from the
the shredded tree stuff. So what do you recommend from a mulch standpoint? I can't imagine that being very fire resistant.
So mulching is a funny topic. Because there are benefits to natural mulches made of wood. They do decompose and they do add the organic amendment to the soil. And that can be a really important area for the production of the nutrients for the trees and plants. The challenge with the organic mulches is that sometimes they absorb the water that comes from rain. And so they act as that first level of absorption, and it may not get to the root zone where you really want it to go. And my appreciation of mulching has evolved as I've learned some of the science. What's taken place more recently is a study from Denver Botanic Gardens on what they call pea gravel or a very similar mix of it that looks like kind of small ball bearing. So a 1/4 inch gravel, you call it squeegee. And squeegee can be a mulch that provides multiple benefits to the plants. And it sounds incorrect when you first hear it, because you think it would heat up, right? But CSU also did a study, and they said that the squeegee mulch can, one, be amended with the soil, and it creates multiple pore spaces, so you can get that air down there. And then two, it acts as a very successful protector of the soil, but allows that water to permeate into the soil too. So my appreciation for different mulches has evolved from only wood mulches, which are still very effective in many ways, but they do require periodic refreshing in and especially in this windy area, blow down to your neighbor's area, right? And lucky for them. But for you, the squeegee mulch can be very effective as a planting medium too, because it allows that plant to expand.
But the wood mulch is okay from a fire perspective?
I would say,
I guess that's why I was asking.
in a thoughtful approach, perhaps in that second or third zone.
Right, in zone 2, I mean,
Yes,
the yard is small enough, I basically 30 feet to the street. So therefore, zone 1 is 5 feet of gravel, and then from 5 feet to 25 feet is wood mulch plants.
maybe I should reserve a statement on that until I know what the folks who would put these plans out would say.
Okay,
Would you like to see an inclusion of organic wood mulch as an option and as a feature?
I guess, I mean, that's what I use. I guess that's what I'm asking, what else is there? Because the last slide had something called arbor mulch or something,
The one with the planting plan?
backward. Backward. Arbor mulch, yeah,
I don't know what that is.
okay. Yeah, and the cardboard, I can't imagine cardboard being non-flammable.
So sheet mulching is a you can call it a lasagna mulch, if you will. It's popular in California. You put a layer of cardboard down and you put a little bit of that wood mulch and then another one. And what it does is it creates an excellent weed barrier. It also allows the water to permeate down and then it decomposes. And so it's a low cost, low labor way to do it. And it can actually look pretty good too. If you cover that with a little bit of wood mulch, you'll never know it's there. And the weeds really don't compete. So whereas, with wood mulch, weeds love it. They can germinate in it and they come right through it. And it does require a bit more work. We found that with the rock mulch, the squeegee mulch, it's easier to pull those weeds out.
Okay.
So it's a trade-off.
Okay, so my question, I guess, as you're looking through this, is what to mulch with, just generally, yeah.
We'll provide better guidance to you, I think, particularly, but I do think generally, that first 5 feet is the most important. Having this squeegee mulch or pea gravel mulch is likely to be recommended rather than wood mulch, either right adjacent to your home. I do see a hand raised online, so Rachel, if you want to unmute on your end, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So just real quick, what about landscape fabric?
So landscape fabric has been in practice and use for many years because of its relative familiarity and its effectiveness for an immediate benefit. But it has some serious drawbacks. One of those is that it does degrade over time, but more seriously is it will start to fill the fine materials from wood or rock mulches will actually stop the infiltration of water and the movement of air. And so there's a movement away from landscape fabric. Certainly black plastic is a no-no everywhere. That's no longer acceptable. But the fabric itself is still common in the green industry as a practice. But for one thing, it's slippery, and so the wood mulch will blow right off like a Teflon pan. And then two, it doesn't allow that mulch to break down and then benefit the trees and plants. And so I would think that we're going to perhaps resist including that as a typical practice. For one, it would save you a ton of money, and two, it just doesn't do a lot of good for you. The weeds just grow on top of it. They're smarter than the fabric, so it's not like you're getting a lot of benefit. Does that help your question?
I've viewed it already.
Okay. I'm looking at the owl as if she's gonna answer that. Okay. Let's go to the next one. So this is the Sonoma Marine Water Saving website where they have these located. And if you haven't seen these before, each of these is clickable to see the details. And it's a really well done website. They have the renderings there. They have the packets for printing. So you can go through each of the elements, and then it's a little complicated, but you have the features to shift around. So here's a native one, to speak to your question or your statement about natives. They want to do the same thing. It's a beautiful place in Sonoma, and so they're very conscious about their environment. Here, the cottage is more of a formal look with rows and kind of an English approach, right? And you get a little bit of turf in here. And so the turf could be native grass, which is really easy to make a turf-like version, including blue grama and buffalo grass. You can do an 80-20 mix of that. It looks like regular turf. It can be left unmowed and it grows to about 7 inches and has these beautiful little seed heads. And it doesn't require but about 40% of the water of bluegrass. So you can get that turf appearance if you want, or since this would be potentially a good location for dog tuff, you can have the same thing. You would just need a little concrete barrier between the dog tuff because it would move into all these other areas. And then, so here's a cul-de-sac one that we're seeking to include, and then an eco-edible, both for humans and bugs and animals too. So they have these here, and you can click in and you can see all the plan attributes. Let me tell you what's holding us back from giving these to you today. So the timing is challenging. We don't know what the market's going to be when we put the RFP out. We don't know what the cost proposal will be from the contractors. And we don't know how complex this will be to get as close to Sonoma Marin as we would like to do so. And then the capacity issue is part of the reason why we've not been able to have this progress further. We have our own limitations internally, and the green industry has absolutely been, I'm not going to say on fire, that's the wrong thing to say. But they have been really, really busy after the pandemic, and getting quotes from them and getting their participation has been very difficult. Perhaps you've had more success in your environment, but we do a lot of grants for Northern Water. We do grants for HOAs and cities. In fact, we have some here this year. And the green industry is so busy that they have the luxury of turning down work. And so that could be the case where we might not be able to get all of the participation we need. And then we'd like to reach out to you as stakeholders and have a couple of public meetings to be sure that we're on track with what this would work for you. I encourage you to go in and check these out. And let's go, I think we have one more.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So what is the timing, and for those who like want to do this yesterday, are there actual like landscape companies that are expert in this that we would work with directly?
Well, the landscape industry is relatively unregulated in Colorado.
Okay.
And so it's hard for people to pick certain entities. Luckily in Boulder, you have some providers that I think have more of an interest in this than in other parts of the state.
Okay.
And so there are people who have certifications. We do provide certification testing. We focus on the irrigation side of things. We want irrigation practices to be top-notch in landscape providers so that they can deliver you high efficiency, high performing landscapes. For the other portions of this, there are companies that are listed on the Associated Landscape Contractors of Colorado website. That's alcc.com. Those people tend to be firms that are credentialed, professional, experienced, and they tend to have high aspirations for design and performance. And so they have people that tend to lead the industry in adopting water efficiency, climate resilience, fire resilience. So I would say that's a great clearinghouse for some of the best performing firms. This is my last slide, but just kind of a inspiration. And I think we have a little bit of time for remaining questions with myself and Robbie.
Would WaterSense be a good resource for them? Don't they have the WaterSense certified landscape?
So yes, so I'm a big believer in the WaterSense designation for homes. That is a third-party certification similar to Energy Star. There are providers in Colorado that can certify your home for WaterSense. It includes an indoor portion and an outdoor portion, and it's designed to be quite a bit more water efficient than a standard code compliant home. The providers will do a water use estimate for the landscape using what's essentially a water budget calculator. And they'll put in the features that you would have, and that'll tell you how much water is used based on the irrigation type, the types of landscape components, how much turf, how much plants, the location you live based on your zip code and your zone. And then there are people that are certified to be WaterSense providers. They call their portal WaterSense Finder Pro. And in order to get on the WaterSense Finder Pro portal, you either take the Irrigation Association classes or those from one called Quell, Qualified Water Efficient Landscaper. So that's another place to find folks that are trained. In fact, the Sonoma Marin Water Saving Partnership came up with Quell to raise the bar for landscaper performance. And so someone can go through Quell. I'm personally Quell certified, and I make sure my team is too. And you can get Quell certified here in the state. We would suggest that people who have more certifications are better than others, because anybody can call themselves a landscaper. That's the way the industry works, and you kind of get what you pay for there too. So it's a little bit of a buyer beware.
Okay.
Does that help? I don't know if I gave you the
Yeah,
answer.
so when are you gonna have your stuff done? So we can work with you?
When am I gonna get it done? Yeah.
I mean, that's not-
Like phase one.
Yeah.
In a perfect world, I would love to have something like this available to you. I'd like to have this rolled out in, I'd like to say late summer. If I could get something that quick. And it will depend on what the RFQ process looks like. That would be ideal. I hate to overpromise and underdeliver. Well, that's my wife. It's my profession, but I think there's the fall timeline possible, or if it was really successful and we got this right away, it would be great to have it this summer, but fall is probably an ideal timeline.
Sorry, wait, who's sending an RFQ to them?
We would be releasing an RFQ to get responses from entities like these to put together plans. So Northern Water would be putting out the RFQ. So it's not Lisa's department, it's not the cities or anything like that.
You're spending Northern water money. You don't want grants, you don't have to get grants or something.
No, this is Northern Water money. Yeah, this is from our budget. Yes, sir.
So my wife and I were talking about how nice it would be to not have to do a sprinkler system. But it sounds like even if we go with some of the stuff that doesn't have turf, we'd still need an irrigation system. Is that correct, or is it possible to get away without that?
You can get away without it. You have to take care of the plants individually, probably the first 2-3 years. But after that, the drought resistant plants usually can survive without irrigation. I haven't done irrigation for probably 10 years. And about, depending on the summer, about every 2 weeks, I might have to run run the hoses. But if we can get a decent rain every 2 weeks or so, I'm usually okay.
Can you bring up plantselect.org? So one of the things I wanted to mention is, that's a great question about, can we have a viable landscape without supplemental irrigation? Plant Select is a partnership between Denver Botanic Gardens, the nurseries who grow and sell the plants, and then Colorado State University. And it's designed to provide plants that thrive in our landscape. Now, there's 183 plants in the Plant Select list, and they're generally available from the better nurseries. So they're not going to be as available at the .org.
At Lowe's.
At
Sorry.
Lowe's. Oh, thank you.
I'm sharing online, she's already in the room.
Okay. Yep, and about 90 of those 183 are natives. But in there, some of the plants in Plant Select are able to survive after establishment with no water. In fact, they like it better with no water. The fun thing about Plant Select is they're tested for durability and viability in really harsh climates, and then they are propagated when they're selected. So I want to direct your attention to the main website, and then let's go up here to design on the upper right. And here there are some different solutions. Denver Botanic Gardens has done designs And we contract with them to help with some of these, so you can see some inspirational designs. The plants they have here are high-performing, colorful, durable plants that survive really difficult areas. Some of them come from Europe or South Africa, and they still provide pollinator benefits, although they're not for the native pollinators per se. But a number of them are natives, including some just from Colorado. So there are some plans here. The difference is these are designs. They're not going to have the rest of the components that I showed you from Sonoma Marin. So they don't have the irrigation layout and some of those things, but they are inspirational. And then some of these could be translated into a landscape for you. They would just need some help from a landscaper to understand where irrigation would go. So these could work for a replacement of an existing landscape. If you had overhead sprinklers and you put these in, which is a viable way to save you a ton of money. By the way, if you take out the turf and you put in the plants, you can still do overhead and you can have a viable garden. You just water maybe once a week or every 2 weeks. So Plant Select has a list of the plants. If you go to the main website, there's Find a Plant, and in there you can see all kinds of cool things. So you can look at trees, they have shrubs, they have perennials, annuals, and it's really neat. So search right plant, right place. I spend way too much time on here. But it's really inspirational because you can pick by the features you want and the type of plant you want, and even the color and the bloom time. And you can go in there and it can show you what it has available. And then all of these are available locally too. And they're in different size pots and plants. So if you haven't been here, it's kind of a fun way to look around. Like this is actually a native plant, little blue stem, and the standing ovation is a version that was found to be upright. So it's the best of some of the natives and those that want to be natives. I should stop. And if you want to go to Sonoma Marin Water Saving Partnership, I can show you that. Or we stop questions. Yes, ma'am.
I noticed on one of the designs that there was mention of gray water. And that's not something we talk a lot about around here. Are there people using gray water systems? Are there ways to implement gray water systems?
So gray water is approved by the health department per the health department region. It gets a little complex, and I think it's not mandatory, it's voluntary. I might lean on Robbie for this one, or Lisa.
Louisville specifically, I can't speak for Superior, but we don't have the proper licensing with the state for gray water systems internal to the house. External to the house, I'm not sure in a landscape environment, that would be a question we need to follow up with you on. But there's a lot of regulatory things that come along with utilizing gray water systems when it comes to CDPHE and some of the other regulatory agencies. And Louisville does not currently have those in place. But I'm not sure from an exterior side, you know.
I don't know.
Okay.
I know that it has been wrapped into the building codes, but like Lisa's saying, it's kind of municipality by municipality. If they're allowed.
So this is the Sonoma Marin Water Saving Partnership, and they have that templates list here. This is that capture I showed you, and then you can go through some of the elements. So we would seek to provide the replication of this where we could. So you have the template files here, and some of the usage, and then the other printables are down below. So it's pretty well done.
Would Castle Rock be a resource for them as well?
I don't know if they have anything like this. I haven't looked.
I guess I'm still hazy. If we're interested in this, what's the next step?
So the next step would be, we would be reaching out and talking through the advisory committee to seek to share with the folks on the recovery site when the updates would occur, when we would have a bid out, and when we would have a chance for you to come and share some ideas, what they would call a charrette. So I would seek to provide updates through Lisa.
So I think the big thing for tonight is just know that this program is hopefully coming, right? We want it to be able to share it with you all so that if this is attractive to you and a path you want to take, you can kind of check this box that Northern Colorado is going to have this, hopefully this path available to you. So that's really the big goal for tonight. I think, as he said, look for announcements through city website, through the town of Superior, Louisville, Boulder County, for more updates as the program advances. But There is kind of, as you mentioned, an advisory committee that is comprised of local governments and residents that were affected by the fire, as well as some of the industry partners that I think will be informing the development of some of the plans. So I think for now, I think we're just happy that we're here and announcing it to you, just to know that it's coming.
So there's nothing we need to do to advocate for it. It's in your hands at this point, is that correct?
That's correct. Unless you give me a big thumbs down, then I can. stop
Yeah,
now.
I mean, I think we are curious, and I think Northern Water is like, I think this is part of it, is they would love to know, is there a high interest level for this program? For them to invest in developing, so if any of you are definitely intrigued or excited about it, they would love to see you show hands.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, so,
Lots of hands.
okay, yeah, thank you for asking that question, Lisa. I mean, if everybody thought this was not a value, that would be useful for us to know.
Yeah, I think we're all concerned about water.
Yes.
Yeah, or the lack of it.
I think it's more than just for the new builds, I think, you know.
Yeah.
everyone.
Yeah.
Just one other thing, as far as rocks, anybody have any good sources for doing like decorative rocks, and is there any reason not to do those from a water usage?
Well, I mean, rocks can raise an all rock landscape can raise the ambient temperature around the house quite a bit. And then the downside of the rock approach is it does invite weeds to take a root. But that's, you know, some of the trade-offs you get with the rock.
And I'm talking about like big rocks, like people would put in their yards. Just
My only source is Pioneer, but I assume there's quite a bit more.
There's also, the Botanic Gardens has an incredible rock garden. And it's a great resource for learning more about that type of garden.
On that point, that's right. This Saturday is the High Plains Landscape Workshop up in Fort Collins, and there's usually a focus on a type of rock garden there, and Kenton Seth out of Wyoming makes these beautiful, they almost look like the flat irons, these rock gardens that are tilted, and he's an expert in that. It's pretty inspiring. Ma'am, I know you had a question too.
I just wanted to get Lindsay's contact information.
Oh, okay. Her contact would be LNERAD, lnerad@northernwater.org.
And do you guys also partner with Resource Central in Boulder?
We do. So we co-fund the Resource Central slow the flow audits with the cities around here. We also have a garden on Resource Central, our one of the gardens in a box. Ours is called Splendid Seasons. It's 200 square feet. The price I think went up to $346 this year, but it's 51 plants. So it's one of the biggest gardens they sell.
Oh, okay.
I know that there were some interest in ways we could help fund the installation of those gardens, but we haven't figured that out yet. But the gardens go on sale March 1st. If you're interested in they're pretty great.
Who is this again?
Resourcecentral.org. They're a Boulder-based nonprofit, but their gardens in a box are very popular. They have different sizes. Yes, ma'am.
Another plug, because I've been really enjoying their workshops, they do have a series of workshops. So just visiting their website is a great place to get lots of information about waterways gardening.
That's right. And this year we're sponsoring one on HOAs too, on how to navigate changes in your HOA management. Yeah, they have seminars are generally from 6 to 8, just like this.
Probably time for one more question, as we've learned the rec center likes us out of here at 8. So we have one more question, and then we're gonna thank Robbie and Frank tremendously for sharing with us. All right.
Okay, thank you all.
Yeah.